everyone, and welcome back to We're Watching Star Trek, the original series. I am Brandon, as always, here with Dan.
How's it going?
And Paul is still out with technical issues. It actually turns out he's just having some problems getting a part, so hopefully he can come back and join us next week. But for this week, we are watching Season 1, Episode 7, What Are Little Girls Made Of? Original air date, October 20th, 1966. And it turns out they're not made of sugar and spice and everything nice.
No.
But this episode does open with the Enterprise flying towards an icy-looking planet called X03, and Kirk and his crew are on the bridge, where they usually are, and he informs Nurse Christine Chapel that they're entering the planet's orbit, which was nice for me to see that she's not just like a one-off character from the Naked Time. Like, I thought she was just going to kind of be one of those people that we didn't see again.
Right. She's, I figured they were just going to kind of push her to the background.
Yeah, I thought she would, like, maybe show up here or there and not have, like, basically a whole, episode around her. But Kirk is talking to her about how she gave up a career in bio research to sign up aboard a starship. And then she makes this kind of weird reply about how, she knows he's alive down there on the planet because they typically, for some reason, I don't know why they typically, like, keep their new characters or, like, their subject matter kind of secret for a little bit in the episodes. But I noticed during this too that there's a lot of radio chatter in the background, like a lot of people giving various reports and ship system reports, which is something that we haven't heard yet on the Enterprise. And I think that, like, personally, I just really enjoy it. Like, I feel like it makes the Enterprise feel like a ship, like more stuff's going on and there's more people on there than just the people on the screen.
You're just not focused on one or two characters.
Right, yeah, it just seems like there's more going on around them.
It feels more organic.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Like, they are actually on a ship that's doing stuff. But Kirk says that it's been 5 years since, his, being the guy on the planet, since his last message. And Christine says that, Roger is a very determined man and that he's going to find a way to live. So Uhura informs Kirk that she's sending some signals to the surface. And Spock says that their records show that there is little about the planet that they don't already know, and that it's 1.1 the gravity of Earth, and the atmosphere is within their safety limits, so they can obviously visit it. And Kirk says that the surface temperature of the planet is 100 degrees below zero, which I was like, hey, maybe they'll send Sulu. He's got some experience with frozen environments.
Yeah, just give him a blanket and he's good to go.
Yeah, and the coffee that he wanted, or wine, I guess. And one of the, like, that unicorn dog thing again. So Spock replies that the planet may have been inhabited once, but the sun in the system has been steadily fading for about 500,000 years. And he says that Dr. Corby, often called the Pasteur of archaeological medicine, revolutionized immunization techniques, and his translation of medical records from the Orion ruins, which Kirk says was a required reading at the academy. And Kirk says that he always wanted to meet the guy, but I didn't know what he meant when he said he was the Pasteur of, that stuff. So I guess he was referring to, I looked it up. So he's referring to Louis Pasteur, which was a French chemist and a microbiologist who was renowned for his discoveries in the principles of vaccination and microbial fermentation and pasteurization. So I guess he's kind of like...
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's like the father of modern medicine. Like, pretty much everything we know about that stuff now was based off of his findings and, like, his theories and stuff. Which, like, just...
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and like, Spock just has references to everything. Like, I swear he's read, like, every book or, like, every page on their internet. And he just, like, every time anything happens, he's like, oh, yeah, I got a reference for this. Like, he's that guy.
Nerd.
Yeah. So Kirk asks Spock if he thinks that there's any chance that Dr. Corby is still alive, and Spock turns off the screen and just doesn't say anything. Like, he didn't even want to say no. He's just like, I'm not even going to dignify that with an answer.
Like, how cold it is there? There's no way he's still alive.
He's like, what are you, stupid? Like, I'm not answering that question. Like, it's a dumb question. But Uhura says that she tried all the frequencies and she hasn't gotten a response. So Kirk just tells her to, keep on trying, stay busy. And then a crew member comes up and hands Kirk this giant, like, tablet-looking thing with a stylus. And I used that, actually, in that game Star Trek Bridge Crew. You can play on the original Enterprise, and you have to use that for a lot of, like, little stuff like selecting different planets and, different systems. And that thing was confusing as hell in that game. And I hope that we get to see it a little bit more to see like its actual function in the show, because there was a lot to it in that game. And it's also like huge. It's not like, modern day tablets. Like just he almost like handed him a TV.
Yeah, I was about to say, wouldn't it be more practical to have a, smaller cell phone device that can do that?
Yeah, it's weird.
I mean, you can teleport people to the planet, but you have a giant tablet, impractical.
Yeah, I would think that at that point they would have maybe something built into his chair, or just like put a screen kind of in front of him or just off to the side or something. But yeah, so Nurse Chapel says that her last signal told about how Corby had found some underground caverns, and Kirk tells her, since then 2 expeditions have gone to look for him and they failed, when Uhura suddenly gets a call from Dr. Corby. And that's when they fade into the show opening. But it comes back with a captain's log where Kirk reveals that Corby and part of his expedition are alive due to the discovery of the underground ruins. So, they went down and hid beneath the planet's surface.
Which you would imagine that would be cold also, right?
I don't, well, like igloos aren't cold, right? I mean, are igloos cold inside? Like, I thought that just having the enclosure, I don't know exactly. I'm going to be completely honest. I have no clue. I thought that, like, going underground, it would be warmer, right? That's why animals burrow and stuff in the winter. Like, I don't know exactly. Just like, because it's kind of like insulation, right? Like, doesn't the dirt and things up top act as an insulation from the cold?
Well, that I'd imagine any protection from the wind hitting you.
Yeah, that's another thing.
Help.
Yeah, I imagine that as well. So Kirk tells, or Kirk says that they've pinpointed Corby's coordinates and that they're preparing to beam down a party. He's having this conversation with Corby, and he begins to tell him that Nurse Chapel is with him, but Corby like interrupts him with this kind of weird request, and he's like, hey, I just want you to come down by yourself because we made a discovery, and we're gonna kind of need an extraordinary decision from you. Spock starts to wonder if it's actually Dr. Corby, and Christine's like, oh, have you ever been engaged? Which Spock seems pretty surprised. Like, he raises his eyebrow. He's like, what do you think? But Kirk,
like, love it is illogical.
Yeah, he's like, we don't do that stuff. Actually, do they get engaged? Oh my!
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay, so I didn't want to go in this direction, but now you've got me thinking about this. Because, they probably do find that, like, love is this illogical thing, and, they're probably really against it. So does that mean that they just, like, procreate because they have to? Like, they don't do it for fun?
So it's more animalistic than, humanity?
Yeah, they get, like, no joy out of it. They're like, well, we got to keep our species going, so, we might as well just go do it. But they're just, like, straight-faced the whole time?
We're more worried about our intellect. They're more worried about their intellect than pleasure.
Yeah, this is one of those things where, like, it flashes through my mind for a second. I'm like, I should see how Vulcans have sex. And then immediately I'm like, no, that's a terrible idea. That's an absolutely fucking terrible idea. Like, don't Google that.
You don't want to go down that dark web.
Yeah, no, I don't. Kirk says that it's going to be a party of 2. And Corby's like, oh, yeah, you can beam Christine down. Because he seems like super surprised that she's there. Because like she talked to him for a second. And he's like, oh my gosh, it's you. So they're just going to go, Kirk and Christine are going to get beamed down to the planet. And I noticed that during this scene, I don't know if you saw this, but while Kirk is talking to Corby over, the intercom system or whatever he's using, there's a guy in a blue shirt and blue pants behind him and a girl in a gold uniform. And they're just kind of standing back there staring at Kirk. And the dude looks like he's seen the most disgusting thing he's ever seen in his life. Like, he's just some extra back there, and he looks incredibly disgusted with his entire affair.
No, I totally missed that.
Oh,
I did not see that.
Go back and just watch the beginning of this. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like, this random just kind of extra, and they're totally out of place because there's nobody else in the shot. Like, it's Kirk and Christine and this guy and this extra guy and girl in the back. And he just looks so disgusted. He's like, ugh, gross. We're going to, like, you're going to go to a planet? Like, that's disgusting. It's just incredibly
Well,
out of place.
maybe one of the past crew members was one of his friends, and he blames Kirk for his death.
Yeah, maybe he's gonna show up in like every episode from now on in the background, just like shaking his head and just looking disgusted at everything Kirk does. He's like, "Oh, you picked steak for dinner?"
Eye.
Yeah, just just like randomly in every hallway. He's like, "Oh, if you wore those shoes today, disgusting. Like you would wear those shoes."
You're a horrible captain.
Yeah. So Kirk and Christine go to the transporter room to get beamed down by a guy who is definitely not Scotty. So he must have been, he must have had the day off.
Also, so you're about to go to a planet that is 100 below, and you don't put a coat on.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was just going. They beam down to an icy underground cavern, and they have like no thermal gear, no coat. Like she didn't even put on pants, like regular pants.
How formal do you have to be going to an icy world?
I mean,
can't change uniform. You have to
feel like this guy who's been, missing for like 5 years isn't going to be mad if they showed up in like a coat.
I mean, that would be logical.
Yeah. Spock would have sent them down with a coat.
He's like, why are you guys going down there without protection?
Yeah. It's just, especially after the whole thing that just happened with Sulu not too long ago. Like, if it's going to be cold, at the very least wear a jacket. But I don't know,
maybe at this point, frostbite isn't a problem in the future. They're like, oh, we'll just regenerate your fingers or your toes.
Yeah, that's true. If you remember during what episode was, I can never remember the titles of the episodes. The Enemy Within, when they did rescue everybody off the frozen planet, they mentioned that they had some frostbite, that they were going to be fine. So maybe they can just like regenerate all that stuff. But I still wouldn't want to go through it.
No, you want to be like, oh, the technology's there to fix my frostbite toes, so I'm going to use it. No, you protect yourself.
Yeah. But they get down there and they don't see Corby anywhere. And Kirk was like, he's supposed to meet us here, so maybe we beamed into the wrong entrance. And Spock calls.
Well, I was going to say right there to me was an instant red flag.
Yeah.
Because you would think he would be super excited to see his fiancée after 5 years.
Right. But the other thing is, I guess, like they just talked to him on this, communicator a couple of minutes ago at most. So I figured, it's a little bit shady for him to not be there, but also maybe it takes him a second to get from where he was to where they're beaming to. But why couldn't they beam him directly into like the main portion of the cabin or the cavern?
I'm not sure. Have we figured out, are they able to go through solid rock when they're being teleported down?
If you remember in the Naked Time,
had that been canon?
Well,
had that been canon yet?
Well, I don't know about solid rock, but in the Naked Time, they beamed into the station or wherever while the frozen people were. But also,
oh, that's true.
Remember at the end of Mud's Women, though, they had to beam to the outside of that building and then go inside. And then when they were, getting ready to get picked up, they had to leave the building. So I don't know. But I mean, like if they can beam, through the ship's hull, I wouldn't imagine like rocks would be that difficult. But maybe, I don't know, maybe there is like a depth aspect to it. Well, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, either way, Corby's not there. And Kirk calls Spock to have him beam down 2 security guys, just to be safe. And then when he gets done, he's like, Kirk out, and just hangs up on him. Like, what the hell is with Kirk and just hanging up on people on his communicator? He doesn't give anybody a chance to say anything, like add anything extra. He's just like, do this thing. Okay, bye.
Like, click.
Yeah, every single time. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Dude, that's his thing, though.
Yeah, it's just...
I'm glad they're keeping, at least the consistency of him just hanging up on people.
Yeah, if he ever is just suddenly, like, super cordial and, doesn't just hang up on people, I'm going to be like, that's a fake Kirk. Like, that can't be him. They must have replaced him with a clone. Yeah. You think they would find that weird? You think if he's like, okay, Spock, send me a couple of security guys, and if you don't have anything else, then we can go ahead and hang up now. And Kirk's like, or Spock's like, what is this? Like, who is this guy?
I feel like Spock would realize that, like, who is this guy?
Yeah. So they do beam in 2 security guys, and Kirk orders one of them, who is Rayburn, to stay where they beamed in and, just kind of watch out for stuff, and tells the other guy, Matthews, that they're all going to go together to find Corby. So they go and they wander around the cabin for a little bit. Sorry, the cavern. I don't know why I keep saying cabin. But they wander around the cavern for a little bit looking for Corby. And Christine almost falls down this huge hole. But Kirk saves her. And then you can hear like this rock falling down the hole. And it falls for a really, really long time. But we never actually hear it hit the ground. So suddenly there's a bright light that shines on them. And a guy steps in front of it. And Kirk and Matthews draw their phasers, and Christine's like, oh, that's Corby's assistant, Dr. Brown. So she runs up to him and, asks where Corby is, and suddenly Matthews just starts screaming, and they all turn around to see that he has fallen down the hole.
And what a shame, because there's only 3 days until he was going to retire.
Yep, every time, too. And also, he was on screen for all of, 45 seconds, so...
Right. I also kind of felt bad because he looked like an older guy. He had some gray hairs going on. I'm like, oh... Yeah. Sorry, man. You're going to have to die for us.
Yep, they didn't sacrifice the young kid this time. It's, the guy that has already done a lot in his life.
Those dang caverns will get you.
Yeah, you got to watch for those holes. But Kirk asks Dr. Brown if there's a path down there where, maybe they go down and help him. And Dr. Brown's like, nope, that hole is bottomless. So there's absolutely no hope for him. And that brings us to 18 dead. So it's been a couple of episodes, I think, since we lost somebody. So we're up to 18 now. But also, obviously, the hole isn't literally bottomless. It has to end somewhere, right? It's just, super deep. But I know we just had this discussion about beaming through rock and all that. But if the Enterprise can do that, and if he's falling for a long time, do you think that they could lock onto him and beam him up while he was falling?
I was wondering that, too, during the episode. I feel like... they would kind of have the model, no man left behind.
Yeah. And didn't we see, I don't know if you saw the more recent, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, which are a precursor to this. But didn't we see some stuff kind of similar to that in those? People getting beamed while they were moving. But I know that that kind of retcon stuff can sometimes ruin things like this. And it's one of the reasons why I hesitate to, reference that, because maybe they didn't think of that until they shot those movies. But I don't know. I just thought that, it could have been a possibility at least.
It's been a while since I've seen the newer Star Trek movies. I can't honestly remember if they were able to do that or not.
Yeah. So shortly after this, the camera cuts to a super tall, bald guy just kind of lurking around behind him. And then he watches, for a second, and he just leaves through a doorway. But Brown says that, what happened to Matthews is terribly unfortunate, and he's super unconcerned about it. He's like, oh, that's terribly unfortunate. And he says
it happens.
Yeah, that's, it's a daily occurrence. They have one of those signs that's days since someone fell in the hole, and it's always at 0. Every time they flip it to 1, they have to, somebody falls in the hole, they got to go back and flip it back to 0.
We don't have time to put railing up to make sure people don't fall over the ledge.
Yeah. You know what? That's going to be, I think that's going to be the Twitter announcement picture for this episode. Is that sign.
It's funny. They had time to install a giant light.
Yeah.
But not time to put some kind of safeguard railing so you wouldn't fall over.
Right. And even if it's just 3 or 4 people in there, if you can do it. I mean, with a hole like that and the amount of traveling they're going to do through this tunnel system, I'm absolutely putting something there, a box, something. Just anything, really.
Yeah, anything would be better than nothing.
Yeah. Christine asks if Brown recognizes her, and he says, you look well. And he introduces himself to Kirk, and he tells him to follow him to Corby, who's waiting, and then he just kind of walks away. He takes 3 or 4 steps away, and he's definitely within earshot. And Kirk asks Christine if she knows him that well. And she's like, well, he's been living down here for 5 years, so, he might have changed a little bit. But, Kirk doesn't even...
Which is kind of a fair point on her behalf.
Yeah, it is. But I feel like if you're going to question this guy, you should maybe wait until he's not within earshot, or at the very least, whisper. Because he's just standing, right there. He's seriously just a couple of steps away. And Kirk's like, hey, you trust this guy?
Well, Kirk is pretty badass. He's like, well, if he gets mad, what is he going to do about it?
Yeah, I'll just chuck him down this hole. Screw it.
Hey, find my friend down there while you're at it.
Yeah, can you send that guy up? But Kirk calls Rayburn and tells him about Matthews, and he's like super nonchalant. He's like, "Hey, Matthews is gone," and
I mean, as many people that die under him, he's probably used to making that call at that point.
yeah, nobody's surprised anymore, and he doesn't even really seem all too surprised about it. Like he always later is like, "Oh, my crewman's dead," but like in the moment, he's just like, "Yeah, he's dead. We can always get another one." But Rayburn says that everything's all quiet where he is, and Kirk tells him, "Hey, call the Enterprise, have a security party ready. We're going to report in at hourly intervals, and if we lose contact or we can't get a hold of each other, have them beam that security party down immediately." But as they're having that conversation, the super large guy is sneaking up behind Rayburn, and as soon as their conversation's over, he kills him. Like you don't really see him kill him. He just kind of grabs him and like throws him down. But yeah, he's dead. So we're at 19 dead already.
And I will say I like the design of the guy that killed the crew member because he's a big dude.
Yeah, oh yeah, he's huge. Actually, when I was watching this, like when I first saw him, I was like, man, this guy, he seems kind of familiar. But I'm like, oh, I haven't really seen too much from that era, so maybe he just kind of looks like somebody recently. But I looked it up, and he's actually played by a guy named Ted Cassidy, who is or was 6'9", and he was the guy that was famous for playing Lurch in the Addams Family show from the 60s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he was doing this like right after. I don't know how long the Addams Family ran or if it was still running at this time, but yeah, he was Lurch.
Oh, I can totally see that now.
But Brown explains to Kirk and Christine that, as the sun in the system was dimming, the people on the planet moved underground. And he says that the people moved into the caverns and, they replaced their freedoms with the mechanistic culture, and that Corby has uncovered elements of the culture that would revolutionize the universe when, if they can get that technology out of the caverns. So as he's talking, they enter like a fully furnished kind of center room. And then a woman comes to the door and introduces herself as Andrea. And Christine is just like not about it. She looks at this chick like, oh, that's what's going on down here? Like you got this pretty young girl just hanging out, like very very underdressed for their research in the caverns.
Very underdressed and very attractive.
Yeah, she's a very attractive woman.
Better looking than most of the crew members up on the ship, actually.
Yeah. And
not bad for living under the ground.
And I'm not even saying that like anyone on the crew is like outright ugly. She's like this Andrea was just a very attractive woman.
Oh, absolutely.
But Kirk's not about all that, and he asks where Corby is, and as soon as he asks, the guy comes out from another room, and he sees Christine, and they have this hug and kiss reunion, and he introduces himself to Kirk, and Brown tells Corby, he's like, hey, they lost the guy, he fell down the hole, and Corby seems pretty apologetic about it. He's like, well, that sucks, like that's super unfortunate,
like bummer, man.
Yeah, he's not just like, oh, too bad, so sad. So at that point, Kirk tries to call Rayburn to, tell him that they made contact with Corby, but he doesn't get an answer. And Corby asks Kirk to, wait on calling anybody because he wants to talk to him about something. But Kirk says, hey, I lost contact with my guard, so I have to get a hold of the ship. And it's funny because this has been a theme in this show that when he called Rayburn, he gave him like a half a second to answer. And then he's like, oh, he's not there. He's like, hey, Rayburn. Okay, he's not there. Like they never give anybody a chance to answer anything.
That is true. They expect you to be on top of it right away.
Yeah, and like every time they're on the ship and Uhura calls somebody, she'll page them over the intercom thing, and if they don't answer in like 2.5 seconds, she pages them again.
It's kind of funny that you say that because, just say for instance, Kirk is using the restroom. What is he supposed to do? Get off the toilet right away and run to the intercom?
Right. And if he doesn't, then he's going to have to hear that for, however long it takes, like every probably less than 5 seconds, until he's done.
He's like, dang, woman, give me a minute.
Yeah. But Brown pulls a weapon on Kirk and tells him, hey, you're not allowed to make any communications. So Corby, apologizes and, he's like, hey, we're not going to hurt you, which is a weird thing to say to somebody you have a weapon pointed at. And, there are things there that are terribly important. And Kirk interrupts him and talks about, hey, I got dead and missing crew members. And Corby then motions to Andrea and has her go over to take Kirk's phaser. But when she reaches for his phaser, Kirk grabs her arm and like spins her around and to use her as a human shield. So he has her and he kind of takes a few steps over towards a table and then he throws her aside and does this absolutely ridiculous combat roll to get behind the table, which first of all, I don't think that roll was necessary at all. I don't, if he was using it to surprise people, I think that it worked, but it, like any use beyond that is just, it's pointless. But also, I feel like she was a better shield than the table was because the table's still standing. Like he didn't flip the table. He's just hiding behind a table now.
Well, he wanted to show some courtesy and, you know, not use her as a shield. Like, oh, well, I'm not going to use another life to protect mine.
Yeah, but I mean, that combat roll was just absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, absolutely. It didn't look good at all.
So he then tells Brown to drop his weapon, and Brown doesn't drop it, so Kirk just shoots him, which is like that's awesome. Kirk does not bluff with his weapons. He's like, look, you know, we're not playing games here. Put that thing down. The dude's like, meh, so he just shoots him. Like Kirk is not messing around.
He's like, what would Spock do? Oh, that's right. Kill him.
Yeah, he just shot him 5 minutes ago. Like, it's just, I really enjoy that about this aspect of Kirk, that he's just kind of like, in some instances, he's just no games. Like, he could have, you know, they could have negotiated for 5 minutes, but instead he's like, put it down. No, okay, shoots him. Like, that's amazing. But the big guy rushes into the room from behind Kirk and picks him up, like, pretty effortlessly, and then slams him into the wall and just pins him there. And then they all hear like this kind of electricity crackling sound, and they look towards Dr. Brown, who's laying on the ground with a big hole in him from the phaser, and his insides are all just like wires and electronics. So he's not a human. And then they go to a commercial.
Which, I did not see that coming. It was a nice twist.
Yeah, I didn't expect a robot. I thought he was just kind of like weird because he'd been down there for so long with, you know, just a few other people, but...
you feel like if you were underground for 5 years, you'd probably go a little crazy.
Yeah, and this is, again, one of those things where I feel like not reading the episode description is what helps to maintain the surprise and stuff like that. And that's kind of specifically the reason that I'm not reading those descriptions. Is like, I want that, you know, genuine surprise of that.
Right.
But they do come back from the commercial, and they're on the Enterprise, and Kirk calls to report contact with Dr. Corby, saying that they will return to the ship within 48 hours. And then the camera cuts to the cavern where the big guy has Kirk's communicator, and he's able to like perfectly mimic Kirk's voice. So it wasn't really Kirk saying that. It was this other guy, which it's safe to assume at this point that he is also an android.
Which at that point, I was wondering, did the people that built him, is that what they look like?
Right. Yeah, like why is he the only super huge guy? But Spock asks you know, Kirk in, you know, parentheses or quotation marks, if he's okay. And he's like, hey, you sound kind of tired. And then Corby, you know, tells the real Kirk, like, hey, you know, don't move, don't cry out, you know, don't mess this thing up. And the big guy who, you know, I'm going to send this dude to injure you. And the big guy's name is Ruck, he says. He's like, yeah, you know, if you try to do anything, I'm going to have Ruck mess you up real good. So he asks Kirk to wait, you know, don't do anything until we've had a chance to talk. Which I really hate this trope of like, you know, I really got to tell you this super important thing. Like, just get it out. Like, don't spend the next 15 minutes saying you have something important to say. Just say the important thing.
Yeah, don't dance around with all the foreplay. Just get to the main course.
Yeah, like 99% of the time, if you just come out with a thing, you can save yourself a ton of trouble. And like, I get that, you know, it would make for a very short episode, but I mean, in this case, I don't think it would, but you know, most of the time it would really just save you the unnecessary trouble of whatever the hell's about to happen if you just say the thing.
Also, being in the position of Kirk, you're just like, dude, just tell me, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, like quit telling me you have something important to say and just say the thing.
Because I think Kirk understands that you believe this is very important. And I'm sure Kirk is willing to hear you out.
Right.
Why just not come out and say it?
Yeah, and that's the other thing is like they could have avoided this whole, you know, gun hostage thing if he just said the damn thing from the beginning. Like even when he contacted on the ship, he could have been like, hey, can we maybe move this to a private conversation, and then I'll tell you this thing. But instead he's like, hey, come down here, I got something super important to tell you. Like, just say it, like just get it out there, and then you can have your discussion, after that.
I think that's a fair point.
But Ruck continues to imitate Kirk when he responds to Spock. He says, hey, I'm fine. Dr. Corby made some fascinating discoveries down here, and then he mimics Kirk and flawlessly, and just hangs up on Spock and doesn't give him a chance to respond. So at least he got that part down too.
Spock was a little suspicious at that point, but when he got hung up on, he's like, no,
he's like, that's my guy. Yeah. So Corby tells Kirk that there's a lot you have to learn before making a final judgment on what's going on here, which again, just spit it out. And he says, Andrea to Ruck. He's like, hey, he just points at him. He's like, Andrea. And so Ruck starts to imitate Andrea's voice, but then he switches and does the same for Corby. And then he switches his voice to sound like Christine, but Corby gets super mad at him. And he's like, hey, don't you ever imitate her, and don't you harm her. And so Kirk is like, well, how about you also tell him to, never disobey an order from her. And Corby's like, all right, as a show of trust, I'll give him that order. And he does.
Which, that's some well-played maneuvering for Kirk.
Yeah, like it really just sets him up to be in like a good position if everything goes like super south. Not that, being a hostage to a guy with a bunch of robots, is a good thing. But if it gets worse, then yeah, he set himself up really well.
4D chess right there.
Yeah, don't they have there's 3D chess or 4D in there? I think it's, I don't know. We'll have to look that up.
I think they were playing 4D chess in one of the very first episodes.
Yeah, with Charlie. Yep. So Corby asks Kirk to give him 24 hours to change his mind. And Kirk is like, do I need to be a prisoner for this thing? And Corby's like, well, the first thing you're going to do if I let you go is go back to your ship, and then you're going to issue a report. And that's how we lose a lot of things like discoveries and all that, that's a fair point.
Which is not wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kirk, he's like, hey, are my crewmen really dead? And Corby's like, yeah, Ruck is programmed to protect, my experiments. So he had to destroy them, against my wishes. I didn't want that kind of thing to happen, but he had to. And I like that he used the word destroy instead of kill. He's like, yeah, like for some reason that sounds like it's worse than he killed them. He's like, no, he utterly annihilated them. Like just absolutely ripped them to pieces. Like you should have been there.
They're beyond dead.
Yeah, like boy, like you want to see dead. So Kirk asks if Ruck is an android. And Ruck's like, oh, I am, but I'm way more complex than Brown was. And that I was left there by the old ones. And that's capital O on both of those. So Corby explains that Ruck has been there for centuries, and that, they use the records that were there in the ruins to build Dr. Brown. So Kirk says that he's like, hey, you've convinced me. You've convinced me that you're dangerous. And he tries to make an escape, but Ruck grabs him and like picks him up above his head and then just like chucks him onto the floor, like across the room.
I was going to say it was a very poor power bomb.
Yeah. He's not working safe. He's not protecting the other guy. So elsewhere, Andrea is talking with Christine and asking why she's unhappy since, she's with Roger Corby again. And Christine is like, well, hey, where's Kirk? And Andrea's like, well, why don't you like it when I use the name Roger? So Corby enters the room at that time with Ruck, and Ruck's still holding Kirk. And Corby's like, hey, if she doesn't like it when you call me Roger, just call me Dr. Corby from now on. And he says that, again, he's like, hey, I need some time to explain things to Kirk and to you, Christine. And I'm going to start with Andrea. So he reveals that Andrea is an android like Dr. Brown. And at this point, it's just kind of like, yeah, no shit. Like that's kind of obvious,
At this point, I'm like, oh, this Android 18 with black hair?
Yeah, could be. Well, we'd have to wait and see her fighting skills. See if she breaks anybody's arm or anything. Or falls in love with like a really short guy. So, like, Christine is obviously jealous of Andrea. And Corby tries to convince her, that Andrea's just a machine. And he's like, do you think I could love a machine? And Christine's like, well, did you? Which is a great question. But Corby's like, she's not capable of that, and she's just a machine, and I have no emotional bond to her. And then he orders Andrea to kiss Kirk, and she does. And then he orders Andrea to strike Captain Kirk, and she slaps him real hard in the face. And he seems into it. Kirk is like, oh, a little kiss, a little slap. Like, this is kind of exactly my thing here.
He does. On top of that, he's being held hostage. So, you're going through a whole range of emotions at this point.
Oh, he's loving every second. Like, he was not cool with being a hostage, but you throw a little kiss and a little slap in there, and suddenly it changes everything.
Like, this isn't so bad.
Yeah. I like how, though, instantly... Christine is like, hey, like, you fucking that thing? And he's like, what? No, like, I didn't build it to do
never.
that. Yeah, he's like, her skin's exactly the same as a human. She's basically, completely human, but I'm not having sex with this robot. Like, it's not a sex robot. Which, I mean...
He's like, this robot has no feelings, so how can I love it? That's not what you're really asking.
Yeah. But, like, a Roomba's not a sex robot unless you have sex with it, so... I guess all he has to do is try.
That's true.
But
I'm sure within those 5 years that would have crossed his mind.
Oh, absolutely. You know what? He probably did, he probably built one every time he was in the mood, and then when he was done, he was, so ashamed that he just destroyed it.
He pushed it down the hole.
Yeah. Oh my God. Can you imagine?
That poor crew member probably landed on a body of broken
that's what I was
androids.
just going to say. Matthews just falls down that hole and lands on this huge body of just disgustingly dirty used androids. He's like, what the? He's down there like, Jesus Christ, I wish I had just died when I hit this.
Died.
Oh God. No, for his sake, I'm keeping him on the dead tally. He doesn't deserve that fate.
For sure. Well, if not, you'd probably wish that you were dead. Like, what is going on down here?
Yeah. Yep. So Kirk is like, look, there's a lot going on here that I don't understand. And Corby is again, he's like, I'll answer all your questions, but with the twist, I'll do it right now. And I was like, thank God. So Ruck is they go to another scene, and Ruck is putting some kind of wrapped body onto a table that also has a naked Kirk strapped to the other side of it. It's like a big circular table with a divider in the middle. And Corby explains to Christine that this is how to make an android. Oddly enough, you start with a body pillow, so you can't tell me he's not sleeping with those things.
Exactly, which brings me to the point, where did he find the female to make an android of her?
Yeah, see, I don't know, because they said that he had a crew of people that survived, so I'm assuming that maybe these are just people that were part of his crew that were dead or about to die, and he just put them in an android body.
Oh, I didn't think about that. I think you're right.
Yeah, so he tells Andrea to go start the machine, and the table starts turning and everything, and then it goes to a commercial. And when it comes back, the table is still spinning with naked Kirk and the body pillow attached, while Christine questions what happened to Corby to make him the way that he is. And then the table just kind of spins faster and faster until suddenly there are two naked Kirks on both sides or one on each side, not two on each side. That would be four Kirks. So Andrea and Ruck both stop the machine, and Corby asks Christine, which one's the real one? And she's like, oh my gosh, they're exactly alike. I can't tell you which one is which. So Corby explains that, the android has synthetic organs and they're all in the right places, and that they've duplicated the autonomic rhythms of Kirk's body. So while at the same time, they duplicated his mental patterns. So if Kirk had cancer or something, or a blood disease or something, would that have duplicated as well? Because obviously it's not living tissue in there. But if he had some kind of just something wrong with him, physically, obviously it's just a machine, but would that have copied over? Maybe not,
it would
a disease
in his
but,
memory bank, wouldn't it?
Yeah, at least not a disease, but if he had, I don't know, just a messed up back, he slipped a disc, is the robot going to get that too?
I think it should, personally, if you're going to make a true clone.
Yeah, but I feel in that situation, if you're going to go through all the trouble, you might as well correct stuff. But I mean, some of those things you probably don't have to. Yeah, it's kind of a dumb question, actually.
Well, I mean, maybe since it was just done so fast, you wouldn't even known. Like, you would just transfer everything over,
Yeah.
not looking to, weed out, like, oh, if you had cancer, like, oh, hey, you have, pelvic cancer. So we're just going to remove that.
Right. So he goes to the Corby goes to the machine to make the mental pattern stuff, and he's like, the machine is going to be so perfect that it could even replace Captain Kirk himself. So Kirk is just laying there, and he hears all of this, and he starts repeating to himself, like out loud, but not super loud. He says, "Mind your own business, Mr. Spock. I'm sick of your half-breed interference. Do you hear?" Which I'm like, that's actually like, that's how he's gonna use the that's how he's gonna make Spock know that the other one's a fake.
Which, once again, great thinking on your feet to know that, hey, you're in a bad situation.
Yeah.
And you're gonna trust your crewmate Spock to realize that there's something wrong.
Right. Yeah. Like, just because he would never say that to Spock. But my other issue...
Oh, absolutely. That Spock should instantly know, hey, something's wrong here.
Yeah. But the other thing is, at first I'm like, maybe, that's what he's going to do with it. But then I also thought, maybe Kirk is just super racist. And since he knows he's screwed here and he's about to get replaced, he wants to make sure that the robot is also a racist. He's like, look,
and he wants Spock to know how he really feels about him.
He's like, look, if this robot's going to take my place, because this is looking bad and I'm not getting out of this, but if it's going to take my place, then I want Spock to know that I hate him and that I am super racist.
Well, the untold story of that is Kirk gets upset every time Spock beats him in chess.
So he's like, fuck that dude.
I'm not used to losing.
So Corby is still at the machine, and he starts turning dials and stuff, and Kirk starts to get shocked. And then the android Kirk comes to life, and regular Kirk seems like he suffered no harm or anything during that process. And then the table rotates, and android Kirk gets out to greet Nurse Chapel. A little bit later, Andrea is serving lunch to Christine, and she's like, "Hey, I've been ordered to to take care of you now." And did you look at the food that they were eating?
It kind of looks like fruit.
You remember we had them damn green circles in Mud's Women? Like, they're just green round things? Because there's more of those on this plate.
Must be the food of the future.
Yeah, like, future food it looks terrible. It's literally just like shapes that are colored. They got some rounds in there. They got some some cylinders. I'm pretty sure there's like maybe a square, like maybe he's got like a yellow square. Like, what do you want for dinner tonight? Like, well, let's have yellow squares. Like, no, we had yellow squares last night. Well, let's go with the green rounds tonight then.
Well, I don't think we've seen any meat yet as they're eating. At least I don't remember. It's all been kind of weird looking food.
Yeah, I don't remember what Joe from the guy that screwed everything up in the Naked Time. I don't remember what he was eating when he had his knife, but I don't remember thinking that it was anything weird, but also nothing that's like normal. So I definitely don't think he was eating, yellow squares and green circles.
No, it looked more generic than that, if I remember right.
Yeah, like he gets prison food on the ship.
It looked like prison food, like slop, like you just like.
So Kirk enters the room, and he sits at the table with Christine, and they kind of talk about the situation and how Christine is worried about, Corby and what he's doing. And he asks her, hey, if I give you a direct order to betray Corby, you're going to do it. And she's like, just don't ask me to do that. And she pushes her food away, and she's like, yeah, I'm not going to eat. You go ahead and eat. And Kirk replies, well, androids don't eat. And it's like one of those dun, dun, dun kind of things. So then Corby and Ruck and the real Kirk enter the room as Corby explains that the android even has Kirk's sense of humor, which is weird because there wasn't really a joke. Well, maybe that is the joke, is that Kirk has no sense of humor.
He doesn't joke?
Yep, I'll be damned. So Kirk says that he's like, hey, there's one difference between that android and I, and it's that, I'm hungry. And android Kirk is like, well, that difference is your weakness, not mine. Which, I mean, it'd be cool to not be hungry, but also at the same time, I would miss food, so.
Well, I think Kirk laid out what's kind of great about being a human, of the joys, of eating, the satisfaction. I thought he made some good counterpoints of
Yeah,
why it's good to be a human.
right. So real Kirk decides to test the android's memory to see, if it has all of his memories and things. And he asks about his brother Sam, and the android, answers all the questions and tells Kirk all about Sam. So Kirk is like, well, me and the android, we have some interesting differences. And Corby's like, well, those are unimportant. So he didn't even get to say what the interesting differences are. He's just like, that doesn't matter. And Corby explains that by continuing the process, he could transfer their consciousness into androids, almost pretty much granting them immortality. And Kirk is like, hey, that's kind of like the promises of Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar and Hitler and Ferris and Maltuvis. And obviously I know who like Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar and Hitler are, but Ferris and Maltuvis were not something I was familiar of. So I did a quick research in case there was some kind of like dictator that, in history that I didn't know about. And those two are actually just in-universe historical dictators that they made up for the show, which is really cool that they're, they fleshed that stuff out, but it also shows that, that kind of thing still happens, which is super interesting.
Oh, see, I was wondering who the last two people were also.
Yeah, so like it's crazy that, I mean, I don't know how long between, now and the future, like now and then. I don't know how much time has passed between now and like when this is supposed to have happened. But like, yeah, obviously they got, at least two more like brutal, I assume, dictators that happened at that time. So that's just an interesting little tidbit that they threw in, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, it's good world building saying that, hey, when, stuff has happened still between, what we know at the point, when the show was made until what they're trying to set up in the future.
Yeah, exactly. But Corby argues that a human programmed into an android could eliminate, jealousy and greed and hate. And Kirk is like, well, you could also eliminate love and tenderness and sentiment. And Corby, replies that they could basically stop you from dying, and there would be no diseases or deformities, and they could even get rid of fear. And Kirk, he's like, we could replace fear with joy. And he explains that, he needs Kirk's help to get to a colony to get raw materials. And Kirk was like, oh, I thought you just needed my approval, but not my help. But while he's, having this conversation, Kirk reaches down to the back of his chair, because they're like the chair is held together, like the legs are held together with a rope. So he starts kind of like undoing this rope. So as Corby, explains his plans, like the typical bad guy, Kirk continues to work on untying the rope. And like Andrea and Ruck are standing right behind him, and they don't see that happening, or at least they don't say anything. Like, they're literally standing right behind him, just, like, looking at him.
Yeah, I felt like they should have been able to catch that since they are androids and they should be pretty advanced with their eyesight.
Yeah, I mean, like, just the fact that they can see, like, they would have seen that happening. But they did not. And Kirk finishes untying his rope, and he asks why, Corby needs him if he's created his own Kirk. And Corby's like, well, I really created him to impress you, not so much to replace you. And so Kirk says, he's like, hey, I am impressed, but not the way that you think. And then he lunges at him and wraps that rope around Corby's neck. And he has his second human shield of the episode. So it's like, damn, we got 2 deaths and 2 human shields. Like, this is kind of a lot of action going on for this one. So Kirk then takes Corby and kind of backs toward the door. And when he gets there, the door opens and he pushes Corby forward and takes off running. And Corby sends Ruck to go after him, and then Christine chases after both of them, and she tries to order Ruck to stop, but he's not listening at all. So Kirk like runs to the cavern, and he goes around, this corner, because they have like doorways in the cavern because they're in, ancient ruins or whatever, like ancient underground ruins. So he goes through this, kind of doorway, and he finds a stalactite on the ceiling, and he grabs that and breaks it off to try to ambush Ruck. And that I've actually recognized because, as I'm promoting the podcast and everything, I'm spending, a little more time on things like Twitter. And there is a Twitter account called Captain Kirk's Dildo. And it uses that screenshot of him holding that stalactite because, like, it's a very penis-y looking stalactite.
That's what I thought when he grabbed it off. I'm like, oh, that looks like a dick.
Yeah. And then, that bot, it's a bot on Twitter that basically like retweets I'm gonna guess stuff that meets its criteria, so like basically anything Star Trek related, or like if you even say Star Trek in there, like it's gonna retweet it. But I was like, when I first saw that as that bot's profile picture, I was like, man, that like they had to have edited that image. But then when he ripped that thing off the ceiling, I was like, holy shit, that does look a lot like a penis.
Also, how hard would it be to rip off a stalactite?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that one was, styrofoam, so probably a little easier.
Yeah, well, right. I just meant in like real life, would it even be
right? Yeah,
would it be possible?
I guess I don't know. Maybe not one that big. I would think. Again, I don't know for sure, so I'm just speculating. But I would think that maybe like something that thick would be like really, really attached. But also, we could just use the excuse that it's kind of an alien planet, so it's probably not made up of the same type of rock that we would find on Earth. So, like, maybe it's a little more brittle and he can just snap it off there. Or maybe, like, he's just super strong and is just now showing it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how fragile, stalactites are. So,
yeah,
maybe it is in the realm of possibility that Kirk could have ripped it off.
We went to some caverns last year, and there was like a lot of like really tight, like claustrophobic areas, but a lot of stalactites and stalagmites. And, you're not allowed to touch anything like that. So obviously I didn't touch any of them. But from what I saw, like, I don't think that there was one in that cave that I could, rip off the ceiling or break off of the floor. So I don't know. Maybe he is just really strong. But, so Ruck's chasing him and he imitates Christine's voice to try to draw out Kirk, and Kirk responds. I think they don't really tell you, but it looked like, he had that kind of look like, yeah, I know that this is a trick, so I'm just going to, trick him and draw him in. So Ruck approaches the doorway where Kirk is hiding, and Kirk, pops out and swings the stalactite penis at him. And Ruck catches it and pushes Kirk down the endless hole, but Kirk manages to hold onto the ledge. So they go to the commercial and come back, and Ruck is, just kind of standing up at the top of the ledge looking at Kirk. And I was like, is he about to like stomp his hand? Like, I don't understand how Kirk is going to get out of this, because like Ruck has the high ground, right? And
right, well, he had that look.
Yeah, and,
if he dies, he dies.
Yeah, and I don't think, we're only a few episodes in, but I don't think that Kirk has the Force, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a lightsaber, so it's not going to be like an Obi-Wan Darth Maul thing where he like flips up over him and, cuts Ruck in half. Plus, I don't know if even Obi-Wan could do that, because, Ruck is very tall compared to Obi-Wan. But,
well, that would have been pretty cool to see Kirk do a flip over him and even do like a drop kick and just kick him over the ledge.
Like a drop kick or like a Hurricane Rana to just toss him down there.
I mean, that would have been a pretty cool way to take him out.
Yeah, I thought for sure Ruck was going off of this ledge, but he just reaches down and pulls Kirk back up. And then they cut to the Enterprise where obviously Android Kirk is in a corridor, and he walks past Spock, who gets up and follows him into Kirk's room. And he says that, Android Kirk says that Corby has a lot of cargo to beam aboard, and they got to, go over their destination schedule with him. And Spock asks if Kirk's going to go back down to, the planet with the command packet that he has in his hand, which I'm going to guess is like, super important captain documents, like probably, where they're going and all that. And Android Kirk snaps, and he tells Spock to mind his own business and says, hey, I'm sick of your half-breed interference. Do you hear? And Spock is like, yeah, all right, very well. And then Kirk is like,
did you see the little smirk on his face though after he said that?
Yeah, like the android believed that it was just like part of their playful banter. He's like, yeah, I totally fooled that guy. But then he's like, wait a minute, Spock, you look upset. They're like, are you okay? And Spock's like, oh yeah, no problems here. And then Kirk,
we're good, even though you just used a racial slur against me.
Like, no, that's just how we are. You call me a half-breed, and that's pretty much it. But Android Kirk leaves and goes back to beam down to the planet with Corby, and Spock immediately calls security, and he's like, hey, meet me in the transport room after Kirk beams down, because we got some stuff going on.
I do appreciate that when they wrote this show, they didn't make a lot of the characters dumb. Like, they catch on fast. They realize, Spock realized something was wrong right away.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've enjoyed the whole time.
15 more minutes of, what's that?
No, I was just saying that's one of the things I really enjoyed, like, since the beginning, is that, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, none of them are, like, incompetent or stupid.
Which you would want that on a spaceship. You'd want the best of the best, because you're out in the middle of the nowhere in the universe.
Right. Yeah, like you said, just every character so far. They have their dumb moments, but they're not, there's never that one that's just like doesn't pick up what everybody else is putting down,
It wasn't 20 minutes of Android Kurt being a douche on the ship for for Spock to catch on, like, hey, what's going on, Captain? Like, no, he caught on right away, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and to that end, I also appreciate the fact that like Android Kirk gets on the ship and then does what he is there to do. Like he doesn't spend the next 2 hours trying to convince everybody like I'm the real Kirk, guys. He's just like, no, I'm just here to do a thing, and he just goes in and grabs that stuff and insults Spock and leaves. He's just like real Kirk,
which Kirk would probably do, right?
Yeah, he comes in, he's like, Spock, you're a piece of shit. All right, I gotta go. And Spock's like, good old Kirk.
Yeah, good old Kirk.
But
Spock's like, one of these days I'm gonna be in charge.
Yeah.
Do you think Android Kirk came across that guy you were talking about in the beginning of the episode?
Oh God, he looks at him with disgust. He's like, man, look at this android-looking son of a bitch. Kirk looks just like an android. I hate this guy. He's just over there mean mugging him. God, it's going to be so hard to pick the Twitter announcement picture for this episode because there's so much potential. Like, a lot of good stuff in this one. But, yeah, Kirk and Corby are going over the command packet, and Android Kirk says that the planet Mitos 5 is a good choice. And he's like, I did actually feel quite at home on the Enterprise, which, I mean, he should. So elsewhere, the real Kirk is laying on a bed, and Andrea enters the room. And she, bends down to, she touches him to talk to him, and he grabs her arm, and he's like, hey, kiss me. She's like, all right, she does, which is a really weird time for this. And then she tries to hit him, and he catches her, and then he grabs her, super tight, and kisses her again. And then she backs away, and she's like, hey,
when the mood strikes you.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, I'm going to die, might as well have sex with a robot.
Like, I've done everything else in the universe.
Yeah, why not? He's like, can we go find that stalactite real quick? And so she backs away, and she's like, I'm not programmed for you. And she tries to leave, but he grabs her, and he's like, hey, are you confused? And she's kind of hesitant, but she's like, no, I'm not. And then she just leaves. And he tries to follow her out, but Ruck shows up and pushes him back in. So he starts talking to Ruck, and he's like, why do you disapprove of Christine's order to save my life? Like, why didn't you listen? Or you did listen, but why didn't you want to? And he's like, well, maintaining your existence would be illogical. And Kirk's like, oh, shit, got my own little Spock here. Maybe I don't need to go back to the ship.
Which I feel like at that point, oh, so you're like Spock. I know how to deal with you at this point. I got to walk you through a process.
Yeah, I didn't actually consider that, but that's yeah, he would have some experience dealing with that because Spock is kind of just a logic machine. But he asks Ruck what happened to the old ones, and he asks if it's possible that maybe, hey, did they build their machines too well? Did they have pride and a desire to survive? And the old ones maybe found your logic frustrating. And Ruck is like, yeah, they got fearful of the machines and they tried to turn us off. And Kirk asks if Corby is just repeating that. He's like, hey, whatever happened, you think I could be happening right now. And Ruck's like, well, humans are super inconsistent and, they can't be programmed. So, by that logic, you're inferior. So Kirk then tries to convince him that, Corby is the real issue here. And Ruck's like, no, it's you. I can't harm Corby because, that's who programmed me. So Kirk is like, well, the old ones programmed you too. And it became possible to destroy them. So Ruck suddenly just remembers. He's like, hey, that's the equation. He overcame that, the old ones programming, so he can do it here. So he's like, existence has to cancel out, our programming. And he grabs Kirk underneath his arms and picks him up like he's a kid. And so Kirk is still, trying to reason with him. And he says, you can't protect somebody that's, trying to destroy you. And then that's when Corby and Christine enter the room. So Ruck just kind of drops Kirk and moves towards Corby. And he's like, hey, you better stop. But he's not stopping. So Corby is also quick to the trigger and pulls a phaser and just disintegrates Ruck.
Vaporizes him.
Yeah, he's just gone, just nothing left. And he was quick too. He instantly recognized that it was not going well for him, and he just put a stop to it. Which again, it's nice to see people, even the bad guys, it's nice to see competent people.
Right. Well, it probably also says that he's probably done that before within those 5 years.
Yeah. I wonder how many like androids he made that he ran into similar issues or like other issues with, and he had to destroy because he doesn't have like a lot of materials. That's kind of his whole thing in this.
He's a very cunning villain.
Yeah. Uh, so he escorts Kirk out of the room and through like a little corridor, and then when they go to enter another room, Kirk turns around and attacks him, and Corby like fights him off, like pushes him off. But during the scuffle, Corby's hand gets injured, and it reveals that he is an android as well. And by this point, I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, like they weren't, they didn't really give it away, but I was not surprised. I'm just like, yeah, he's probably an android.
No, actually, when they were dining earlier in the episode, when they were eating food or quote unquote eating food, I started to believe that he was an android just because he seemed like he'd be a fanatic.
Yeah.
And if you believe so hardcore in your mission or your ideals, why wouldn't you convert yourself to being something what he considered superior?
Yeah, that's actually, I didn't think about that. That's a really good observation. Yeah, I mean, why not? So he tries to convince Christine. He's like, hey, I'm the same guy in here. My body was dying, like my legs were messed up because of the cold. And, he basically had to transfer his consciousness over to the android. But he's like, well, I'm even better than I was before. At that point, an alarm starts buzzing, and he goes to a comm system on the wall, and he tells Andrea, like, hey, someone's in the outer layer, and Ruck's been shut off, which is a nice way of saying that. But he's like, I need you to go get a weapon and, go protect us. So she grabs a weapon, and she leaves the room she was in, where she runs into Android Kirk in the hallway. And she's like, hey, I'm going to kiss you. And he says, no, that's illogical. So she shoots him. Like, damn, girl.
Yeah, a little overreaction on her behalf.
Yeah. She's like, I'm going to kiss you. No. Okay. And then he's just dead.
I take it she's never been turned down before.
Yeah. But I also, I had a random thought during this. So I don't remember which episode it was when we were talking about the different weapons on board the Enterprise. And then we did confirm that they do have phaser rifles, right?
Right.
So I was curious, and I don't know why I thought about this specifically during this scene, because it doesn't pertain to this scene. But, you've seen now a phaser, a handheld phaser that completely, dissolved two, I guess, people/machines. What the hell does the does the phaser rifle do? Is it the same thing, but in rifle form? You're not going to get any stronger than that, right?
Unless you could use something like that for if you come across some type of special armor, maybe. Like the enemy has shields or upgraded tech which would protect them from something like, a normal phaser. Okay,
that's fair. Yeah, that's not something I consider, that maybe there is an armor or a personal shield out there. But yeah, I was just like, dude, this thing already just stops you from existing. What more do you need? But yeah, that's actually a fair point. God, I kind of hope we'd run into something like that. But Corby is trying to convince Christine that, hey, again, he's like, hey, I'm the same person. And then Andrea enters the room and she's like, hey, Kirk freed himself, so I destroyed him. She just literally says destroyed. But then she notices that, the real Kirk is standing there, and she turns to Corby and she's like, look, I'm not programmed for alarms. So she just immediately starts making excuses. But I also really liked how when she went into the room, she seemed super pleased with herself. When a cat brings in a mouse, she was almost bragging. She's like, hey, Kirk tried to leave and I messed him up real good.
Hey, I destroyed someone for you.
Yeah.
You're happy with me, right?
Yeah. She almost had a little smirk. Yeah, I messed him up. So Kirk, he compares Corby to his machines, or Corby and his machines to, what he says he dislikes the most about humanity, and that's how they kill without concern. And Corby's like, well, no, I'm not really a machine. I'm just a dude in a machine's body. And he's like, hey, have me solve any equation. And I thought we were going to do that whole illogical, unsolvable thing where his head explodes or whatever. But thankfully we didn't get that. I don't know if that was a trope at this time in the 60s. But as he's talking, he kind of starts malfunctioning and repeating things. And he can't really get his words out. But he begs Christine to let him prove that, he's still himself. And, she's convinced at this point that he's not really himself anymore. So Kirk orders Corby to hand over his phaser, and he refuses, but then he kind of starts rambling about having constructed a perfect being, but like he kind of seems like he's lost control, and he just hands over the phaser to Kirk. So then Kirk turns to Andrea, and he's like, hey, give me your weapon. She's like, no, I have to protect Corby. So she tries to go and kiss Corby, but he says that, he's like, you can't love me, you're not human. And so she kisses him anyway, and then while she's holding him during their kiss, she turns on the phaser and just disintegrates both of them. So let's say like two people are holding hands and you shoot one with a phaser. Since they're holding hands, do they both just get like destroyed?
That's how it must work. It somehow transfers the energy from you to them if you're connected.
Yeah, like I can't imagine. Okay, like maybe their chests were both, like maybe because, she grabbed him for the kiss and like kind of pulled him in. Maybe because her chest was touching, she managed to hit both of them at the same time. But man, like if that thing's strong enough that it can just make that little bit of contact and you're just completely screwed, like, boy, screw that. Like I wouldn't want any part of that.
Right.
Like if you get just kind of grazed, you're done.
You would think at the end of the episode she had free will, right?
I don't know that she quite had free will. I think she was still, because like she, couldn't hand over her weapon because, her programming wouldn't let her do that because it was going to put Corby in danger. So like she was still kind of bound by that, but obviously she had a little bit of control over something.
Well, did she shoot herself or did she shoot him?
Both. When they were like kissing and she was, holding him to her, she like had the phaser down by her stomach, aiming up, and then just fired and hit them both. I had to go back and watch it a couple times to see exactly how that worked.
Watch that part. I thought she shot herself like in the leg.
Yeah, I went back a few times to watch it because I was really confused about how that worked. So I went through it like 3 or 4 times, and I was like, oh yeah, because the phaser was pointed up and it was like, between their stomachs. But so after they, disintegrate, and Christine's obviously a little bit upset, but not too upset, oddly enough. She must have accepted a while ago that, he's just a machine. But outside,
so she was pretty mad as soon as she saw Andrea.
Yeah.
Like she got salty right away when she saw her.
Yeah, as soon as she's like, I don't care if he dies. Like, whatever. Push him down the damn hole myself.
Like, oh, this is what you've been doing the last 5 years, huh?
Yeah. But from outside the door, Spock calls for Kirk, and he comes rushing into the room with the security team, asking if they're okay. And, he's like, where's Dr. Corby? And Kirk's like, oh, Corby was never, he was never here. Which is kind of one of my issues with him, is that at the end, whenever anybody does anything nefarious or like, they turn from good guy to bad guy, he always tries to like save face for them, like have them be remembered as a good guy. Like, nah, screw that. Put that in your report. Like, he was alive, put himself in a robot, turned into an asshole, died. Like, you don't have to preserve their legacy.
Maybe he's just avoiding paperwork.
Yeah, there you go. He just doesn't want to do. He's like, I can make my report a lot shorter than this.
I mean, they would never know.
Yeah. I imagine they could do a lot of stuff that the Federation never knows about. Probably most of this shit. Like, all of this happens and they get back to port and they're like, man, how was it? And they're like, boring, nothing ever happened.
Honestly, at this point, I feel not the only reason why Spock's with them, but I feel like Spock is on with them to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. Like, I feel like Spock would be like, all right, the higher ups, they need to know. I'm going to tell them because that's a logical thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess even if it's not like officially his job, he probably would do that anyway. He's kind of like a babysitter almost. He's just keeping them honest.
I don't want to say like he would intentionally narc them out, but his mind process of being a logical thinker would say like obey the command level. So if someone higher up than Kirk tells him to do something, he's probably going to do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can imagine that. But back on the Enterprise, Christine is having a discussion with Kirk, and she decides that she's going to stay, with the ship. And so Kirk asks Spock if something's bothering him, and Spock's like, well, I was rather dismayed at the use of the term half-breed. And, Kirk kind of gives this, half smile, and he's like, well, I'll be sure to remember that the next time I find myself in a similar situation. And I'm like, this is a similar situation. Like, this is the second time he's had a clone. So, like,
Right.
So at least he
This
has kind
happens
of a
every other
protocol.
week.
Yeah, he's got protocol. And then they just go off on their next adventure. And that's pretty much that. Personally, I enjoyed this episode. Like, I didn't think it was anything like super crazy. There was no like big twist or anything. But I wonder again, looking at it through, the lens of maybe the 60s, where this kind of thing hadn't been done a lot. I wonder if like the Dr. Corby as an android thing was a big surprise back then, like a real big twist, and it's just kind of like commonplace now. You kind of expect it. Really no complaints.
I could see that.
Yeah, I really don't have any complaints about this episode. Like I said, I was glad that a character like Nurse Chapel got we got to see her again. It was kind of nice to have the focus not be completely between Kirk and Spock and McCoy, because we got no McCoy on this episode. So like they kind of gave some of these people a break, and there was very little Spock. So that's cool, because you don't really want to I feel like watching just those guys every week would kind of start to wear on me. So it's nice to get a little bit of a break. But yeah, like I said,
Right.
Overall, I just no complaints. Solid episode. Like nothing super special, but nothing really bad for me. What did you think of that one?
I really enjoyed this episode personally. I liked how they keep showing how Kirk has foresight. He's always planning, thinking ahead on, his moves. I enjoyed how Spock was able to catch on right away, like, hey, this is a fake Kirk. The villain, well, he's not so much. The villain was pretty good. He's not your typical villain. You kind of understand where he believes what he believes so intensely that nothing else matters, which doesn't make it right, but doesn't also make him a flat out villain.
Right. He's kind
also,
of the Thanos in that, like, he's got the right idea but the wrong way of doing it.
Right. Also, seeing Russ, the android, it makes me wonder, hey, there are other alien races out there, obviously, and this is what some of them might have looked like. Because, like I said earlier in this episode, I feel like if you're going to create an android, you'd probably create an android that looks like yourself, or your species, I should say.
Right.
So we kind of got a kind of new race of aliens put in, even though the old ones are no longer.
Right. So I guess, like, I was curious. I wanted to ask your opinion on this. So do you know the whole the ship of Theseus thing?
Yes.
Okay. So that kind of applies but kind of doesn't. But if you take your consciousness and you put it into a robot body, like, is that still you, or is that not you? Like, it's kind of you, but it's not.
Man, that's a tough question, honestly. At least with the ship, when they're talking about it, you place it, over time, you change parts in and out. And
right.
Even though you could replace everything in the ship, I think it's more or less your experience of sailing that ship that makes that ship the true ship, in a sense.
Right. I guess, like, a better question would be, like, if you were to transfer your consciousness to an android body, like, could you be sure that it transferred, or that it didn't just copy, and that, like, you're actually dead, but now this isn't actually that guy. It's just another version of him that thinks he is that guy. You know what I mean?
Well, I also think you have to look at it from the perspective, even though all your memories are transferred over, is there a soul, quote unquote, to this body?
Right, exactly.
Are you just memories, or are you something more than just memories?
Right. But also, given the opportunity, would you put your consciousness in an android body?
If you would have asked me that question maybe 15 years ago, I probably would have said yes, because I'm like, oh, immortality, that would be pretty cool. You wouldn't miss out on anything. But being older now, I would probably say no, because I think what makes being human so interesting is you're only here for a short time.
Right.
You never get that back. Which I'm kind of surprised they were kind of asking this question in the 60s, honestly. I feel like this would be something that would have came out maybe like in the 80s or 90s for an idea.
Well, I mean, yeah, I got to imagine a lot of the philosophical stuff like that's probably been around for quite a while. I mean, especially, it's not like dying is a new concept. Like, I have to imagine, they probably wondered about things like this, as far as if you could live forever, would you? Like, they've probably been wondering about that since the beginning of time, I would assume. But
right.
But yeah.
Well, the question is, would you do it?
See, that's what I was gonna say. Is I'm on the fence about that. Because while like you made a very good point in that part of what's special about us is that we don't last forever. But at the same time, man, I would be super curious about, just the things that we find out in the future. Like, especially when it pertains to something like space or even just like our own ocean. Like, I am super curious about the things that we will find in the future, or like the things that we'll do and the things that we'll learn that I will never do and I will never know. So I really feel like my answer to that would change depending on the day that you asked me that question, because some days I would be like, hell yeah, dude, I would love to live forever. And then on other days, I'm like, I don't want to live another like 15 seconds. So really, I think it just depends on the day.
Well, also, if you say you did transfer your consciousness over to an android body, do you still get the endorphins when, you're playing a video game and you beat a boss? You still get that, same thrill? Like you said, like, oh, it'd be nice not to have to eat anymore, but come on, eating's kind of fun. Also, are you going to do androids get pleasure from sex? Do they even have sex?
See, I feel like all of that stuff would be worked out by then. Like eating, I would love to be able to continue eating because I love food, like I said. But I imagine that would be a little more difficult because like then you have to break all that down and like how do you reproduce the taste of things. I feel like in terms of stuff like endorphins, like it's all just chemicals, right? So they could figure out how to pump that stuff into the appropriate times. Because like obviously you don't want to live without things like that, or like when Corby had mentioned being able to remove fear, and it's like, well, what's the point of living then if you don't have that fear of death? Because that's,
well, hell, sometimes fear is what keeps you alive.
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, I think my biggest issue would be if I transferred my consciousness and it did actually transfer to not just copy. I would probably in under a year have a just an existential breakdown of trying to figure out if it did actually copy or if I'm a fake. Like, even if it did work, I would probably drive myself absolutely insane and wondering, like, am I still, that same Brandon, or am I just a copy of Brandon and like he's dead? Like, I'm not the real one,
Well, also with that, unless you were to power down, you would never have to sleep. You'd think about it constantly.
Which would be terrible because I am one of those people whose brains just never shuts off. So I would have to like run my batteries out or something. Oh God. If I'm going to do this, they need to fix a lot of things first. I'm not going to sign up for the beta. But yeah, I mean, if that's it for you, that's going to be it for me.
Yeah.
So the next episode that we cover is going to be Season 1, Episode 8, entitled Miri. If you like the podcast, don't like the podcast, just want to talk about really anything, especially Star Trek related, we're on Twitter at WWST_podcast. You can email us at on Gmail at wwstpod@gmail.com. You can check us out anywhere you find your favorite podcasts, and that includes audio-only versions on YouTube. We don't do video. I know that's like it's becoming a popular thing to do podcasts, like video podcasts on YouTube. And at that point, like, is it even really a podcast if there's video involved? I don't know. That's another discussion for another time. But yeah, that's it for me.
Later, guys.